see all of y'all back, or most of y'all back anyway. I was here on time. I was here early this time, please note. Unlike last month, my apologies again for those who might have known about it. So today, last month, we started off basically a kicking off again of the series of Suwannee County history. And last month was basically just a brief 1 hour or so overview of its history. So today, we may not have finished with it, but we're going to at least start a topical study on town of Live Oak, city of Live Oak. Last go around, I think I mentioned this to the folks that were here last month, I'd done a chronological study of Suwannee County history and then did topical. This time I'm doing topical first and then chronological. And I had the Live Oak presentation down to about 35 slides or so. And then this morning I started tinkering with it, and so I went up to about 60 or 65 slides. So we shall see how far we get today. If not finishing today, we'll finish up, Lord willing, next month. So any questions before I start? Again, glad that y'all are here. So let us start with the founding of Live Oak, or as far as we can tell, the founding of Live Oak. So basically, we're not 100% sure when Live Oak was founded. There are some sources that say 1858, some that say 1859. The earliest reference I can find in any existing writings is 1861. They're on the right-hand side when it's mentioned as Live Oak Station. It's a railroad stop on the newly completed Pensacola and Georgia Railroad. Now, before that time, the place was a stop on the old salt road, basically from Georgia going down to the coast. You couldn't go to the grocery store and buy lots of salt, and so settlers would go down once or twice a year down to the Gulf Coast, and they would boil the water and take the salt back home with them. And so a lot of them would stop at a particularly large live oak tree, like the one there in the picture, not that one, but one like it, where there was a pond, there's a big tree, they could water their horses, they could rest and have lunch, those kinds of things. And so that happened for many a time. So when the railroad, the Pensacola and Georgia, was under construction starting in 1857, it did not go to Pensacola, nor did it go to Georgia at that time. It basically was from Jacksonville, more or less, to just west of Tallahassee. So as they were constructing that railroad, and they got through this part of what is now Suwannee County, the workers would rest under that same tree and sit by the ponds and stuff as they were building the railroad, basically right past the tree. And so that spot became, hey, let's stop at the Live Oak. Let's go to the Live Oak. And so when a station was built there by 1861, it was called Live Oak Station. It made sense. That live oak tree was located basically, let me see how I describe it, the corner of Scriven Avenue and 4th Street. There's a retention pond. If you want to think about it, it is just north of the tracks from where the pizzeria is and King's Portable. It's on the other side of the tracks. There's a retention pond. That was where the pond was, and the live oak tree that no longer exists. It died about 10 years later, to be honest. So that is where Live Oak, I guess you could say, started. Now the station itself was not there. It was basically a block or so to the east, pretty much on the corner of, make sure I've got that right, corner of Connor and Houston. That was the original downtown Live Oak. That's where the railroad station, the railroad depot, was originally located. So William Rousseau was supposedly the first station agent. I'll talk about him in just a minute.
What was the names of the two corners that was on?
Where the depot was, or the railroad stop
station
was, on Connor and Houston.
Connor, I don't know that one.
Connor is basically the one just south of the railroad through Live Oak. It's brick in a lot of the parts still.
And the other one is?
Houston. It's spelled Houston. If you're not from here, you'd call it Houston, but it's actually Houston. It's Houston Street, named after Edward Houston, probably, who was the president of the Pensacola and Georgia Railroad that came through here. And that's how I know if you're not from here, is if you call it Houston Street. That's a dead giveaway right there.
Yeah.
I had to tell my wife that when she moved here, when she married me. It's like, please do not call it Houston. She was born in Texas, so she's used to Houston. It's like, it's not here, it's Houston, just accept it and move on. It is what it is. This reference here, this earliest reference I have found so far was from early 1861. And basically it is describing a connector line, and I'll talk about it more in a little bit, but they're basically building a connector between Georgia into Florida at this stop. And Live Oak is so unknown that the person writing this, the reporter, is saying, hey, here's where this stop is located. It is being about 22 miles from Lake City and about 12 miles from Columbus near the Suwannee River. Columbus is now the Suwannee River State Park. So they are describing where this place is, because pretty much nobody would probably know where it was. So that's the first time I've seen Live Oak mentioned. So by 1861, there was a Live Oak station. Now the William H. Rousseau, that's a picture of him, or a drawing / picture on the left, and that's his tombstone. There on the right, he was a very early settler of Suwannee County and this area. He was here by the 1820s, mid-1820s, when we were still part of, I guess, Alachua County probably, before we were part of Columbia, and then when we became Suwannee. So he moved here. He lived close to what's now Suwannee Springs. It was called Lower Sulphur Springs at the time, and a few other things. But basically near Suwannee Springs, he lived there. He had between 9 and 12 children, at least 9 that I know of, but some sources say 12 children. And his wife was the daughter of another early settler in this area called Makaja Dean. He died in 1842 during the Second Seminole War, but he was a well-known settler of this area. And William's wife was named Mary Ann. And her dad is actually buried at Carver Cemetery, which is just across into Columbia County, but it's close to Welborn. A lot of early settlers lived in the Welborn area, what's now Welborn, and a lot of them are buried there, including Makaja Dean. William Rousseau served in the Second Seminole War between 1835 and 1842. He served several times in one of the local units. According to some of the records I have read, he helped to establish the first land office in Alachua County. At the time it would have been Noonanville was the county seat. And so if you wanted to buy property anywhere in this area, you were going to that land office if you wanted federal lands anyway. The records also state that he was the first supervisor of elections of Columbia County when Florida became a state in 1845. Again, at that point, Suwannee was part of Columbia County, and he lived in what's now Suwannee County. So he became the first supervisor of elections, or what we call supervisor of elections today. He also was the local representative to the Florida House of Representatives in 1852. He apparently began the first Masonic Lodge in Suwannee County, supposedly in his barn, according to what his daughter wrote, 70 years later. But he established that in 1858. It's the Mackey Lodge. It no longer exists, but he established that. He ran some businesses in the area, and as I've already mentioned, the railroad agent. He also served in the Civil War. He was a lieutenant in the cavalry and then became a captain. He had 2 sons die of disease in that war. I found out this morning while I was doing some research on him. And had some other sons that survived the war. In 1865, he became a senator, but his health started to decline, and so they moved down south to Clearwater, or what became Clearwater, hopefully for his health, but it didn't work, and he died at the age of about 52. He was almost 52 years old in 1870. And as I said, that's his tombstone. It's in the aptly named Rousseau Cemetery, which is one of the earliest and oldest settlement cemeteries in Clearwater, still there. And a lot of the Rousseaus are buried there. A lot of those early settlers are buried there. So that was probably the guy that named Live Oak. So I already mentioned this during the Civil War. We have no connector from Florida, railroad-wise, into Georgia. So basically, as the war is just beginning, that document I just showed you a couple slides ago, is talking about, hey, we need to build this connector line so we can start routing stuff to the rest of what would become the Confederacy. And so between Lawton, Georgia, which is now DuPont, Georgia, down to Live Oak. And so that's kind of where Live Oak started to grow, is because they needed that line. So construction began in 1861, and it was very important because Florida during the Civil War was the youngest state in the Confederacy, It was also the least populated state in the Confederacy. But it had a lot of cattle, hogs, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of food and crops that could be sent to Confederate soldiers elsewhere. And so that's what the Confederacy wanted to use that railroad for, was to more easily transport. Now, it was still not complete in 1864, which is when we had the Battle of Olustee, which I believe this weekend is its reenactment over in Lake City and Olustee. But that battle was Florida's largest Civil War battle, and it kind of highlighted the need for that railroad because there were a lot of troops that were coming from Georgia and other places. They basically got off pretty much right here and had to march down to Madison, hop back on another railroad, the Pensacola, Georgia, and start traveling back to the east. They couldn't just go straight through by railroad. So those folks that showed up at Olustee, some of them were pretty tired because they'd been marching for 20, 30 miles before they got to the railroad again. And so when they finally completed this railroad was in March of 1865. Does anyone know when Lee surrendered to Grant? April of 1865. So that railroad served the Confederacy for all of 1 month, unfortunately. It was actually one of the reasons for the Battle of Olustee because they wanted to burn the bridge that was being built across the river there. And another one there at the Pensacola, Georgia, across the Suwannee, what's now the state park. But anyway, so it didn't do much good for the Confederacy, but it did do a lot of good for Suwannee County, and particularly Live Oak after the end of the Civil War. Because if you wanted to come into Florida by railroad, you're going to be coming through Live Oak. So a lot of people moved into Live Oak in the years after the war before they started building other ones like over in the Jacksonville area and other connector lines in between. So this was very helpful. One of the issues that popped up right after the war, immediately after the war on this railroad connector line was, as the war was progressing, the Confederacy, as you probably know, did not have a lot of manufacturing capability. So they basically got stuff wherever they could. And what they decided to do to complete that connector line, they had the wood, but the iron to put the rails down and the ties and all that, the metal part of the railroad, they just couldn't produce. So what they did was they took the iron from the Florida Railway, or railroad, which was built by David Yulee. He was in charge of it. They basically forced him to give those up so they could finish this connector line, which was much more important. The other one, his railroad basically had been captured on both ends by the Union by that point. It wasn't really any good for anything. They needed it more at the one coming between Live Oak and Lawton, Georgia. And so basically, the Florida Railroad Company lost its iron, its metal, to our connector line. Well, Yulee sued the Confederate government, and then it followed through in U.S. government after the war ended. He won, basically got all his iron back. His railroad never came back. It shut down. But he basically won the battle. He lost the war, but won the battle in that victory. And so basically, Pensacola and Georgia had to then buy new iron to put in there. So for a brief amount of time, that railroad had been shut down, but it was reopened by October 1866. It was back in operation, and people continued to move in to Live Oak and Suwannee County especially. In 1882, that connector line pushed further south into what's now Branford and all the way down basically the Tampa area. And that opened up a lot of that area for more road operations. So that one really helped to establish Live Oak post-war. I won't talk too much about him because I'll talk more about him in the Civil War presentation. But Lewis Thornton Powell, I can't remember if I mentioned him last month, but Lewis Thornton Powell was the son of a Baptist minister. The family moved from Georgia in 1859 to what he called outside of Live Oaks. He called it with S, Live Oaks. And that's where he lived. When the war began, he was 17 years old. He joined up. He was too young, but he joined up anyway. And joined the Hamilton Blues or the Jasper Blues, which later was the 2nd Florida Infantry Company I. He fought the Peninsular Campaign in 1862. He was wounded and captured at Gettysburg, but he was able to escape a little bit later. Supposedly a female nurse kind of fell in love with him and helped him escape. And so he was able to wander up in the north a little bit, joined Mosby's Rangers, which was a guerrilla unit fighting kind of behind the lines of Union Army. Things like that. He possibly even joined the Confederate Secret Service. There are some suggestions that he might have. done that. Well, while he's up in the Baltimore area, he was introduced to a very prominent actor by the name of John Wilkes Booth, and basically helped him out. And so they sat down along with some other folks to hatch a plot to originally to try to get some of the Confederate prisoners back in the army. Let's capture President Lincoln and let's trade him for some of our soldiers who are suffering up in places that are too cold for them, those kinds of things. And so that was the original plan. And then the war basically was ending, and so they decided, let's just kill Lincoln. And while we're at it, let's try to kill the vice president. Let's try to kill Secretary of State William Seward. And so John Wilkes Booth, Lewis Thornton Powell, and several others were involved in that conspiracy. Same night that John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln at Ford's Theater, our, by this point, 21-year-old Live Oak native Lewis Thornton Powell went to try to kill the Secretary of State William Seward. He failed only because Seward had been injured in a carriage accident, and so he had a protective wrap around his neck, and so when he tried to stab him in the neck, it deflected and stabbed his cheek instead. Lewis Thornton Powell also injured about 4 other folks, including one of Seward's sons who had to have a metal plate put in his head because of it, before he ran out basically screaming, I'm mad, and ran off for a couple of days, stayed in some cemeteries, came back to the house of Mary Surratt, which is where the conspirators had been meeting. Unfortunately for him, that was the same time she was being arrested for her role of having housed these folks. One of the people there to arrest her recognized him, saying, hey, he was at the secretary's house. So he was arrested, put on trial, and along with the rest of them, they were found guilty and executed. But he was from Live Oak, so he put Live Oak on the map for not a good reason. But that's him on the left, picture of him, and then that's a drawing, obviously, on the right, showing him braining Secretary Seward's son with the butt of his gun because the pistol was fired. So he just used it as a hammer and smashed his head in a little bit. Now, when he died, his father was still preaching here. He's still a Baptist minister. We've got marriage certificates at the courthouse where he was performing marriages here. The father, George, was trying to get up there to see his son, but he got sick and was waylaid and could not get up there in time. He apparently, a few years later, I think 1871, some of the records show, he got the body of his son and brought it back down to Central Florida, which is where they had moved by that point. Well, 35 years ago almost now, 1992, Smithsonian, somebody was going through one of the Native American collections and found the skull of Lewis Thornton Powell in the collections. It had been put in the wrong spot. It was labeled correctly, just misappropriated in the wrong spot. And so somebody, I guess, when they exhumed the body, had taken the head as a souvenir and stashed it in the Smithsonian. So in 1992, his head was reunited with the rest of his body down, I believe, Osceola County, and there it is today. Fun. Interesting stuff. So not so good part of Live Oak's history. He just thought he was serving his cause, those kinds of things. All right, post-Civil War, again, that railroad that brought a lot of folks in, brought a lot of Northerners in. Yankees, carpetbaggers, whatever you want to call it, brought in a lot of Northerners from up north down south. Some of them were using the new post office that had been established in 1866 by a guy by the name of Moses Stebbins. Moses Stebbins was our second clerk of court, so my boss's way predecessor. He was also from the north, came down south after the war. That first post office in Live Oak was located on the corner of Howard and Houston. So basically the parking lot of the First Baptist Church is basically where it was. So that was there, so they can now send letters back and forth. Live Oak was still not the county seat at this point, I want to point that out. Houston, the community of Houston was the county seat, which is where the golf course is today, Country Club. 1867, telegraph lines were coming through Live Oak, so that allowed a lot easier access and contacting, phoning home, if you will, through the telegraph. And let's see. Some of the folks that came down were John and Nancy Parsley from up north. John came in 1866. His wife followed, and family followed in 1867 after he'd established a home and business and such. John Parsley bought up most of what is now downtown Live Oak. He laid out a lot of the streets. We have an Ohio Avenue, because that's where they came from, Urbana, Ohio. Before that, they were from New York and Massachusetts. But they kind of followed where the trees were, timber and that kind of stuff. Gained and lost a fortune or two. So he came down from up north to Live Oak to regain a fortune. So he established downtown Live Oak as we know it. He built a saw and planing mill, pretty much north of where First Baptist is today, the Enterprise, or it used to be Enterprise Rent-A-Car, that area right there. That's where he built the sawmill, which was right next door basically to the post office, and right next door to the railroad station, so to speak. He also built a nice house, nice sized house, let me put it, it's a pretty plain house, but a nice sized house across from what is now the courthouse. And again, laid out a lot of the streets. Ohio, named after where they came from. Howard Street was one of the sons. Wilbur Street was another son. Parsley Street, named after the family, those kinds of things. Now, he basically was one of those pushing to have Live Oak become the county seat. Number one, it's more centrally located than Houston. Number two, it's got that better railroad access, because you don't just have the east-west running, you've got the north-south running railroad. It's got telegraph service. Hey, it's right by my house, so I don't have to go to Houston, 3-4 miles to Houston. I can just go across the street, those kinds of things. So he helped to get the county seat moved, he and his wife, along with Nelson Connor, who was clerk of the court by that point, Nelson Connor, for whom Connor Street is named. So on August 1st, 1868, the county seat moved from Houston to Live Oak. Unfortunately, John didn't get to enjoy it too long because he died a week later. Probably of malaria, based on the description of his illness. We had a lot of ponds in downtown Live Oak. I'm guessing he might have contracted it from the mosquitoes. But his wife remained very big and busy in politics, in social things, in business. Some say she's the one that had the better business sense, but she was able to operate sawmills and all kinds of stuff by herself. She was one of those who incorporated the Suwannee School Company. She donated plots for schoolhouses, churches, black and white churches, all kinds of stuff. So she did a lot of good for the next 30 years or so before she passed on. This is a picture I found a few years ago. It's poor, but it's the best I can find, of the Parsley house, again, across the street from the courthouse. It's big, but it's very plain. He basically built it very quickly because when the family moved down, there was a cold spell. And so the family was having to live in basically the first floor of his warehouse. So it's like, I need a better house for my family. So he built this, but you can see by the columns, they're just square columns. I mean, there's nothing fancy about the house. It was big, but it was not fancy, but it was nice for the time. Let's see, as I've already mentioned, county seat, and this is a chapter from the Florida records. State of Florida records show that at the top, the county side of Suwannee County shall be permanently located at the town of Live Oak on section of land known upon the United States surveys as section number 23, township 2, range 13, south and east in said county of Suwannee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just describing what the county was supposed to do for their new county seat. And I get into this more when I have a presentation just on the courthouses and their locations, way further on down now, in the chronological part of our study. But I do want to point out that when Mr. Parsley and Nelson Connor worked it out, it kind of like was a gentleman's agreement of sorts, and Mrs. Parsley, and basically Mr. Parsley agreed to wipe out some debt that Mr. Connor had on some property, some of the downtown properties, if Mr. Connor got the county seat moved. And if he built a courthouse on property that the Parsleys proposed across the street from their house, which was stuff they owned. Well, part of that happened, but Mr. Connor did not build a courthouse. What he did was use the Baptist church that was built by the Parsleys originally, kind of used that, rented that out as the county seat. He then moved it and then it blew down in a storm a few months later. And so Mr. Connor seemed to be destitute at that point. So he goes to Mrs. Parsley, Mr. Parsley now having died, goes to Mrs. Parsley and basically says, if you don't give me money and basically pay off these deeds that you sold to me, I'm going to let the newspapers and everyone know that you and your husband helped get the county seat moved. And so she transferred, all right, here's the deeds of the property, that's yours. And then she sued him in court. And I go into a lot more detail when we get to that part of the presentation, but it's very interesting how all that happened. I mean, politics and blackmail and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, this guy, Nelson Connor, was a politician. He was a businessman. He was also a minister. Probably not the best one. So just all kinds of interesting things about that one. For the sake of time, I will skip the rest of it. So Live Oak becomes the county seat, which helps it to grow even more. By 1870, the county's population had grown by 50% from 10 years before. And we were up to between 3556 and 3821. A two-story jail was built on part of the Parsley lot. It was called Calaboose, which is Spanish for dungeon. But that's what it was built, a two-story, and actually the way you accessed it, because I've got the records of the courthouse, the minutes talk about, here's a description of the building. You basically had to go up to the second floor, and then they dropped you down to the first floor. That was where the dungeon part, I guess, comes from. So, courthouse problems, and again, I go into more detail on, there's a whole presentation on this kind of stuff about courthouses. But the exact site of where the courthouse is now located came about roundabout way with intrigue, backstabbing, illegal activities, illegal voting, just all kinds of fun stuff. And I'll throw out a few of the things for you, just so you know. So, Nancy Parsley, now a widow, in November of 1868, proposes, hey, now that Live Oak is the county seat, why don't I give you this property across the street from my house? If you will build, the county will build a courthouse there. That sounds good, but the next month in December at the meeting, she basically just withdrew her offer. She didn't like something about it and what she was proposing to do and build, so she withdrew the offer. So at the same time, basically this is going on, the county has now sold the old courthouse in Houston. Basically they have transferred the property, because there were 80 acres originally the county had bought when the county became a county, over at what's now, again, Houston, the country club. Most of that area right there where the country club is was county owned, 80 acres. So they basically just transferred / sold most of the property that was left back to some of the original owners. So they need a new courthouse in Live Oak, which is now the county seat. And so Mrs. Parsley backs out. Nathan Walker, who has been a business associate of Mr. Parsley, he actually came Massachusetts, Ohio, or in New York, Ohio, Suwannee County with the Parsleys. So a longtime business associate. He proposes a courthouse location closer to the original site of Live Oak, basically where the old hospital used to be, which is now Azalea Court, if you know where that is. So Nathan Walker and H.A. Wise, who's a Yankee businessman also who's moved here, they proposed, here, let's just propose this spot here instead. And so the Board of County Commissioners accepts that new proposal. All right, Parsley's out, you're in, you got it, start construction. So that was December of 1868. Well, there are no minutes for a January of 1869 meeting, so I'm guessing it didn't happen. But in February of 1869, what they determined, the county commissioners meet, and they determined that, oh yeah, when we were meeting in December, we might have had a quorum. We thought we had a quorum of commissioners, but one that had just become a new commissioner didn't actually pay his bond and stuff. So he actually was not technically a county commissioner. So therefore, we didn't have a qualified quorum. So everything we did in December is now null and void. Okay, great. Also in the meantime, the Florida legislature had changed the law. Supposedly, a lot of citizens from Suwannee County complained that the citizens should decide where the county seat is, not the county commissioners. So that's been going on in the few months since the last meeting. And thirdly, Mrs. Parsley brings hers back up. It's like, hey, since that's kind of unnegotiated, I'd like to bring my proposal for that site back up. I unwithdraw it, basically. So now you've got the Walker site, which sounds like construction had already begun. For like 2 months they've been working on it. The Parsley site now the legislature decided, well, the county commission can't determine it, it's gotta be the citizens. So they basically hold an election. First election was held on March 27th, 1869. 6 polling places, Live Oak being one of them. Well, the final results were Houston receiving 215, Parsley site and Live Oak received 168, and 91 votes for the Walker site. None of them got a majority. Then they realized, you know what? Dead people are voting, and people are voting twice. And we're not even sure how many places we're supposed to be voting on. Is it just Live Oak and Houston, or is it 2 places in Live Oak and then 1 at Houston? So they basically threw out the vote, had another vote in May, and they basically said the choices are either Houston or the Parsley site in Live Oak. So Mr. Walker Wise, there's a route. And so at that point, Live Oak was elected by the citizens as the county seat. And so it became the county seat. Mrs. Parsley came and recorded a deed of that property, which is now where the courthouse is. And up until that time, the county commissioners and such would be meeting in the Baptist church, which has not blown down yet because Mr. Connor hasn't moved it. So I got ahead of myself a minute ago. Nathan Walker's building, which had almost become the courthouse, was basically almost finished at this point, from what I could tell. And so he went into business with Nancy Parsley, who he apparently did not get along with very well, and a few other folks, and they established this school, the Live Oak Male and Female White Seminary, just for white students. So they established that as a private school, basically. And unfortunately for Mr. Walker, his business ventures fail, and by 1870-ish, 1871, he owes $4,000 to Nancy Parsley, which is $100,000 today, basically. Owes a lot of money to her. And his sawmill, the lumberyard part, he's going bankrupt. And so what he does, and it's in the records as such, the night of October 31st, November 1st, 1871, he fled out west to Chicago. That was out west back then. Never to return to Suwannee County. Meanwhile, his building, again, I've already talked about the Baptist church building being blown down by that point. Let's get through this part of what we talked about. They almost go back to using the Walker Wise building, the old school building, almost courthouse building. But in 1872, they advertised for a new building. There's also a lawsuit. And again, I'll talk about this more. I'm talking about it a little bit now, but I'll talk even more about it, whole presentation on it. Basically, they still want to move the county seat to another place, commissioners. And so they're sued by one of the locals, who then becomes a county commissioner, who is then suing himself as a county commissioner. But basically, the judge rules in his favor, the citizen in favor, against the county commission, and they have to build on the property that's now the partially lot. And so in 1873, they received bids. Willis Ball of Leon County is selected as the builder, and he builds a courthouse on what is now the courthouse lot in Suwannee County. This is an insurance map from 1903, which is the year before the current courthouse was built. But down here, it shows in yellow, that indicates that it was wood, the 2-story wooden courthouse. I've got all the specs from 1873, the courthouse for this building. So I can show you all kinds of details about it. I think it was $8,000. Let me look. $8,000. 5,400 square feet. Can't do that today, can you? But that was the first purpose-built courthouse in Live Oak. So that shows it there in 1903. That was the year before it was moved. In this reddish color, that means brick. That was basically the vault. They built a vault of brick later on. The wagon shed's behind there. I guess that was the garage for the elected officials. So This is a picture of it after it had been moved a couple times. As it was, it says it's under renovations, but the date and the pictures, it's actually being torn down. This would have been in the late 60s. It was moved a couple times. Basically, it was moved across Wilbur Street when the 1904 courthouse was built, and then it was moved again further down Pine Avenue. And pretty much it's kind of the south end of where the jail is today. That's where that was. But it was torn down. It's used as apartments and whatnot. Meanwhile, Mr. Walker's property, that almost courthouse a couple times, was sold, basically foreclosure, and it's sold to a guy by the name of E.F. or Elijah F. Henderson. He's the one that bought it out. And in 1873, it was still being, by 1873, it was still being used as a private school. But in that year, he sold it to the Florida Bethlehem Baptist Theological Institute, which was a group of African Americans who wanted to establish a school of higher learning for the African American community. So this became the Florida Institute and opened up in 1880. Eventually in 1918 became a college, and it still exists today as Florida Memorial University down in Miami. So the buildings that were there were eventually torn down. I think I'll talk about it a little bit later. They were eventually torn down to make way for the Suwannee County Hospital in the 40s. I'll talk about it more. That yellow building there at the top is probably it. And the Florida Institute site, again, was where Azalea Court is today, which is, what, a block or two west of First Baptist? One block south of 90. Old 90 used to go right by it. About the same time that's going on, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church, was looking at establishing a suitable site also for African Americans. So you've got the Baptist talking about one, and AME Church talking about school for African Americans. They started discussions earlier than the Baptist, but they didn't really do anything with it until they found out the Baptist were about to do something. So the AME Church jumped in on the bandwagon, and they chose a site in Live Oak, basically on the north end of where John Hill Park is today. And they started to build a nice building, and they had purchased the property from Nancy Parsley. Brown's Theological Seminary, or Brown's Theological and Classical Institute. July 4th, 1872, they started construction, a lot of fanfare. Unfortunately, there was a hurricane, embezzlements, all kinds of stuff. Financial panics, fires. So that building was never completed. It eventually was sold to pay off the employees who had never been paid because the guy in charge embezzled the money instead. And so it was torn down, sold for parts, and the school opened up in Jacksonville a few years later as Edward Waters College. I don't have a picture of the building, sorry. So all you've got is a picture, a very poor quality picture, I might add, of Edward Waters College entrance. I need to replace that at some point. All right, 1870s, 1880s, we've got several newspapers in Live Oak. The Live Oak Advertiser was established before 1879. It was actually bought out in 1875 by Daniel M. McAlpin. Bad picture on the left, and then a picture of him on the right circled. And it basically, he renamed it from the Live Oak Advertiser to the Florida Bulletin, and a few years later, after he had sold it, it would become the Suwannee Democrat, which lasted for 140 years until COVID got it. And that is the Daniel McAlpin for whom McAlpin is named. All right. Suwannee County continued to grow. 100% population growth between 1870 and 1880. Even though we had some hurricanes hit all in a row. Sounds familiar? 3 weeks, we had 3 of them hit in September and October of 1873. Destroyed a lot of crops, cotton, sugarcane, buildings. We can relate if we were here a few years ago. Yeah. Similar to that. But Live Oak continued to grow, but it was not incorporated until 1878, April 24th, 1878. 39 citizens, male citizens, met at the Suwannee County Courthouse And this is the actual notice of that first meeting. This presented in March. It's like, hey, in April, we're gonna meet to discuss incorporating as a community. And so they established a town, 960 acres in size, Live Oak, Florida, with a live oak tree at the top, was the seal. First mayor was A.L. Woodward. First town council was H.A. Blackburn, H.M. Wood, C.K. Dutton, Major H.A. Wise, Thomas Thompson. S.W. Hicks was the town sheriff and the town tax collector. And the next day they held their first official meeting, approved a few things, and Live Oak was now incorporated as a town. Now, maybe I mentioned this last month, but when you drive into Live Oak on the major streets, you'll see established 1878. That is not correct. Incorporated 1878. Pet peeve of mine. Live Oak was about 20 years older, but you know, they didn't ask me. But yeah, this is the first page in the first Live Oak City Council minute books, which I've scanned and got copies of. But it shows all those folks that live within the what would become the city limits, or the town limits. So you can see some of the old names there. Pretty cool. Live Oak grew, 1890s, early 1900s. Suwannee County grew, but especially Live Oak grew. Population went up 50% between 1890 and 1900. People like Thomas Dowling moved into Live Oak, operated lumber mills, sawmills, all kinds of ancillary things related to that. Lots of turpentine, timber, brick manufacturing, wholesale, farming, lots of Victorian era houses built. This is South Ohio Avenue. Basically across the street from that house is Pizza Hut today. So that gives you an idea of where it was, these houses. The house there on the front left was the house of Captain W.J. Hillman. I just went blank for a second. Captain Hillman, who was probably our first millionaire, owned lots of businesses and property, you know, thousands of acres, that kind of stuff. The showplace. The one behind it is actually still in existence today. It's been moved further down on South Ohio Avenue, but there were dozens of these homes in Live Oak between Ohio Avenue and Duval Street. That's where the rich folks lived in the late 18 and early 1900s. 1898, Major George Porter volunteered the state troops to serve in the Spanish-American War. He also did a lot of other things, which I'll talk about in just a second. That's Major Porter there in his uniform, military uniform. W.J. Hillman, that picture of the house I just showed you, born in Warren County, Georgia. He basically showed up in Live Oak by accident. He thought the train was going one way, it went the other way. He hopped off, and still young, penniless boy. He basically was carrying stuff from the railroad station to one of the local hotels. And then he started working for the local newspaper. Didn't last very long, and didn't do too well. He then became a convict camp guard. And there's a book called American Siberia. I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. 400 pages, most of the book takes place in Suwannee County, about the convict leasing system. He's mentioned in there. At that point, he's still a kind of young, snot-nosed guard, doesn't really know what he's doing. And so the writer of that book doesn't have much good to say about him at that point. But he learned his lesson, got better, and pretty soon he was in charge of hundreds of convicts, and that's where he got his nickname, Captain. He was captain of the guards. He prospered in turpentine. He became chairman of the road department. He was big into roads, building roads. He had one of the first automobiles in Suwannee County and in Live Oak. He helped organize the First National Bank of Live Oak, the Suwannee Hotel, which was around for 60 plus years, almost 70 years, a landmark across from the courthouse. His home was a community showplace. He and his wife didn't have any children, so they were childless. But one of the things he did was on Christmas Day, he would give a silver dollar, I'll get it out, to the first 100 kids that showed up at the house. And, said hey to them. That was a lot of money. $1 in the 1920s, 19-teens. He died in 1931. Loss was mourned by the entire community. So lots of things that he did. Again, late 1800s, early 1900s, these folks are moving in and making lots of money. Another one that moved in at this point is Thomas Dowling. He began Live Oak's first waterworks, which still is partly in existence today, up until a few years ago, was still running. He built this nice home, which you can still see. It's a restaurant today. They're on Duval Street. And so he built the waterworks across the street. Make sure he got good plumbing. You know, he wanted water. He owned the property, he owned the waterworks, why not? 75,000 gallon tank. Let's see, 3 years after he built it, he was basically leasing it out. There were 8 people that were using it, but gradually the town of Live Oak bought it, or later became City of Live Oak, bought it and started expanding the operation. He was probably the first person in Live Oak to own an automobile. And the first day he drove through, this was a steam-powered Toledo. It looked like steam coming from the back of the vehicle. He had a Van Dyke kind of beard. The steering wheel was more of like a pitchfork-looking thing. And so the janitor, the Suwannee Democrat, thought it was the devil and dropped down on his knees and prayed. This is him on the left as a young man, and then right later in his years. So this era is basically Live Oak's heyday in many ways. Live Oak becomes the 5th largest city in the state of Florida, the largest inland city. It was basically Jacksonville, Pensacola, Tampa, Key West, Live Oak, statewide. We had a lot of things going for us. Here, let me read this. This is from a newspaper dated 1905 or 1906. I can't read it, it's too small. But I want to read this portion, and they are quoting from Miami. It says, Miami and Dade County have their long-delayed census at last. This is the 1905 state census, by the way. And the result shows that the Democrat, the Suwannee Democrat, was too generous in conceding precedence to that city over Live Oak in the matter of population. So basically there was a discussion and trying to figure out who was bigger, Live Oak or Miami, in 1905. Our 7,000, Live Oak's, 7,200 gives us 5th place in the procession, with only Jacksonville, Pensacola, Tampa, and Key West ahead of us. Speaking of the Dade County Census, the Miami Metropolis, which I guess was a newspaper, says, the showing, however, in population especially, is not gratifying and falls short of what was expected. The entire county, which is Miami-Dade County, according to the new census, contained in 1905 but a few more than 12,000 persons. By that point, we had like 18 or 20,000 in Suwannee County. Miami has been conceded 5th place among Florida cities, which meant that it had a population of more than 7,200. But now comes the official count, placing the total number of persons in 10th precinct, in which it is located at but a little more than 6,000 persons. So it is with all other places, everyone falling short of what had been expected. At least 1,000 or more of the 6,000 persons credited to the precinct reside outside the corporate limits of the city. This reduces Miami's population to the neighborhood of 5,000. Certainly it has more residents than that, but we will have to make the best of the situation. So that was them conceding to Live Oak as 5th largest city in the state of Florida in 1905. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. A lot of folks were moving in. People like B.W. Helvenston had moved here. He was a principal, and then on the side, basically to make extra money, decided to go into the insurance business. And the school board said, you got to do one or the other, so he dropped the principal part and continued with the insurance agency, which continues today as our oldest existing company or business. We had, what else? He also ran one of the newspapers called The Banner. He helped participate in the organization of the First National Bank. He established a city cemetery, which eventually was bought out by the city, and that's after when he had a child die. And before that point, the closest one was apparently Antioch, which was like 7 or 8 miles away. So it was nice to have one in town, or close to town at that point. Now let's see. By 1896, we had an ice plant being established. We've got an electric plant built by Mr. Porter. So Live Oak by 1901 has not only ice, but has electricity, running water from Mr. Dowling. We were coming up in the world. 1904, new brick courthouse was built. One of the oldest ones in Florida, still being used as a courthouse. Pretty much looks about the same as it did. A few little alterations. Interior is different, but pretty much it looks very similar. And like I said, I've got a whole presentation on the courthouses of Suwannee County. Let's see, 1906, a two-story building was constructed on the corner of Wilbur and Ohio Avenue. That was a new post office for the first floor, and then on the second floor, county office space and local businesses, things like that. Then about 10 years later, they built the newer post office, which up till a couple years is what we used. And the first floor of the old post office by the courthouse, can't see it, but it's like right here. That was torn out eventually to be used as a drive-through gas station. The second floor then burned in the 60s or 70s, and what was left was part of the first floor. That building is still there today. It was the last Mexican restaurant. But it's just south of the courthouse. We also, believe it or not, had at least one opera house during this time period. At least one, maybe two. Depends on how you term an opera house. But in 1906, George Porter and H.F. Dexter built a one-story, and I've got the description of the courthouse, a one-story opera house / skating rink, multifunction. It was wooden, built it just to the east of Hotel Bon Air. Anybody know where Hotel Bon Air was located? It would burn down a year or two later and would be removed, and they would build the city hall in its place. So it was basically where the retention pond is between Old City Hall and the Live Oak Fire Department. That's where we had an opera house / skating rink. It was eventually torn down in 1922. By that point, we had the Alomar Theater, which originally was being built as an opera house, a newer opera house of brick, bigger than what Dexter and Porter had built. So lots of stuff coming in. All right, this is a picture taken from the Dowling Water Tower. Between 1897, which is when it was put up, and 1903, because the current museum is not here. The building that houses the museum was built in 1903, and it would be here, but it doesn't exist. So Water Tower built in 1897, which is where the picture comes from, and it's prior to 1903. So 6-year gap I've narrowed down to. Those were the old railroad freight passenger depot places in Live Oak at that point. Let's see, a lot of the original buildings in downtown Live Oak by this point were being replaced. The first generation wooden buildings were being replaced by brick. Pretty much city council, town council / city council said if you're going to build in the downtown area, it's got to be with brick, because we had a lot of fires, a lot of losses. So they said, all right, it's got to be within this fire district, got to be brick. So a lot of these buildings are being replaced.
Can I ask, how were all these buildings paid for that are public buildings? Were they all voted for by the public, or were there personal donations so people could get their name on a sign? And there's a lot of building to go on.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't so many public buildings per se. There was the old city hall, there was Suwannee County Courthouse. Most of these were private individuals, and there are houses in here, even in this picture still, or businesses that people are setting up. The public buildings were basically voted on by either the taxpayers or the county commission / city council said, we're gonna build this. We're gonna basically sell bonds to build these structures. But like the skating rink and stuff, that was personally, H.F. Dexter was rich, George Porter was rich, and so they had the money to be able to build it. And they probably had investors too. But that's where a lot of those public buildings.
Was there any dispute amongst residents at the time when these people came up with these big grandiose ideas?
If there was, it was not recorded in the minutes of the meetings. Now back then, a whole day's worth of meeting was about 1 or 2 paragraphs. So you lose a lot in the discussions. I do minutes, I've been doing minutes for 25 plus years, I put a lot more details in my minutes. Because I know one day somebody may read them, maybe not, but maybe I'm being vague. I know I read the old minutes, and so if there's 100 years from now, somebody like me that wants to go through them, I want them to know what was going on, a little bit more than decision made, meeting closed. That doesn't really tell you what was going on in between, so. We don't know for sure. I'm sure there are people complaining, but Live Oak was growing, and with it being the 5th largest city in the state, a lot of people wanted these things to happen. They wanted the entertainment, they wanted the opera houses,
Was
skating
there
rinks.
any big problem between northerners and southerners at that point? Did we distinguish at that point down here?
The Southerners stayed outside town.
That was part of that. I mean, that was part of it. I mean, a lot of these folks that moved in, not all of them, but like George Porter was from Arkansas, which was still the South technically. H.F. Dexter was from here. He was born here. His dad had been the largest slave owner in Suwannee County before the Civil War. So you got a combination of folks that lived here all their lives, multi-generational, and then a lot of Northerners coming in too. So yeah, there were some issues. There was some back and forth. Reconstruction here in the 1870s was pretty rough. We had a few killings. We had Nathan Walker, talking about him, he was sheriff briefly. Might have been another reason he left town, because in our court dockets at the courthouse, there are a succession of sheriffs. They don't last a 4-year term. Even county commissioners were not lasting 4-year terms in the 1870s, 1880s, late 1860s. So there were a lot of contention between Northerners, Southerners. But by this point, by the early 1900s, not so much. I'm sure there was still a little bit. But by that point, Civil War had been over 40 plus years. That generation was dying off or retired. And so a lot of people were moving in, not just from the South, but the North, all over the place. So I haven't seen it as much in the early 1900s being mentioned. So good question, though. Good question. An article from 1908 says that all professions were represented in Live Oak, including, quote, physicians, surgeons, opticians, oculists, preachers and teachers, attorneys, civil engineers, dentists, veterinary surgeons, and all others that are needed in a wide awake community. Also mentioned several hotels that we had. The Ethel Hotel, which is that one right there. The Ethel Hotel, the recently completed Suwannee Hotel, which I showed you a picture of earlier, the Brown House, the Ohio House, which the Brown House might have been the old courthouse, the Ohio House, several other well-kept boarding houses. They were pouring miles of sidewalk by this point. Mr. Hildreth, C.N. Hildreth mainly, was the one doing that. And they were adding more each month. Yeah, I mean, I love this picture. I don't remember where I found it, but I was so glad when I did. Because this right here is Connor Street. There's the railroad still. You can see all these railroad lines. This is when we had about 4 different railroads coming through Suwannee County through Live Oak. Right here is Ohio Avenue. I mean, some of these buildings here still exist. Love Inc., that's the Love Inc. building. Back then it was Worth Stevens Company. The Lewin building. Courthouse you can't really see, but it's probably about right there. Should be about right there. It'd be the old courthouse building. Those buildings still exist today. Public Defender's Office, Red Bullard's office. That one I'm thinking is the Parsley House. Seems to be the right location, 2-story. But I mean, you still got homes right here too, amongst the businesses. So, but that is downtown Live Oak, as best you can see anyway. Town Council, talked about earlier, established and incorporated in 1878. Not established, incorporated. Town Council was established in 1878 when Live Oak became a town. They met several locations. Originally, the old Suwannee County Courthouse. But then they decided to meet by 1886. They were renting the room from John F. White, one of the buildings he owned. It's called the room in the southwest corner of the White Basin block. And that is where Rhett Bullard and the Public Defender's offices are today. Those are, to my knowledge, the oldest existing buildings in Live Oak. They were built 1884. There may be some other ones, but I haven't found them yet. Let's let's see, $48 per year was the rent on that. In 1888, they started meeting the old storehouse of H.F. Dexter, which was on Connor Street, and that was the north side of what's now called Alomar Court. If you were from here, you would know it as the Alomar Theater if you're old enough. They also met temporarily in the hall of, this is partially when we had a yellow fever epidemic in 1888. 1889, they reached out to Gus Potsdamer, started renting out one of his halls, just basically east of the old Dexter storehouse, so still on Connor Street, still in that same immediate area. 1894, a new Masonic temple was built on the southwest corner of Duval and Ohio, and so they started meeting there, not just the town, but also the Episcopal Church, and it was the armory for the Suwannee Rifles, which was our local national, well, come to be called the National Guard. Back then it was the militia. 1909, they dedicated a purpose-built city hall there on Duval and Ohio. And beautiful building, single contractor, local architect. Neither one of them had done public buildings before. As far as we know, they never did one afterwards, but that one's still in existence. It was used up until the 70s as the city hall. When they outgrew their space, they built the new one there on White Avenue. And this one was used by the fire department, police department for another few decades. They moved out once they built their own buildings or bought newer buildings. And now it's the Chamber of Commerce. Just, a month or two ago, they renamed it the John Yulee Building, after John Yulee, longtime city councilman who's passed on, but he was instrumental in helping get the building restored. So glad to see that building still there. And no, that was not a clock tower. It looks like it, but as far as anybody can tell, it never actually had a running clock in it. What they would do is they would put some guy up there, and he would be the fire watch. And so you could see where fires were, and there was a bell system. So if you were a fireman, and not just a fireman, but if you lived in town, you would know based on the bells and how they were rung, I know where it is. You'd go straight to the fire. Pretty cool. All right, 1909, moving up. Wow, this is going to be a two-parter. I'm on like slide 23 of 60-something. So we'll stop after this one, I guess. How about that? So Live Oak in the 1900s, very prominent. In 1909, we were the site of the State Confederate Veterans Convention. This is downtown Live Oak, looking from the White Basin block, one of those oldest brick buildings I know of, looking towards, in the back center, recently completed old City Hall, old to me, but building, the new building then. And most of these buildings are still in existence. There's a monument set up in the center, and people invariably ask me, was that marble and where is it now? It was not marble. It was built out of wood and plaster just for that purpose, and then it was torn down after the convention. But thousands of people showed up, and then they were gone. By 1913, the main streets had been bricked. A sewage system had been installed, which helped a lot with the smell, with the dust. They also started outlawing outhouses, started draining the ponds, a lot of the ponds that were downtown Live Oak. By 1915, we had that new post office that served 2 city routes. And at the same point, Suwannee County had a population of over 20,000 people. And the city of Live Oak redid their charter, expanded what they could do. But even despite those improvements, Suwannee County and Live Oak in a way was kind of like the Wild West. We had gunfights, we had vices. When you go through the county records, which I love doing sometimes, you'll find things like murders, attempted murders, brawls, bigamy, women running places of ill repute, thefts of hogs and cows, gunfights, all kinds of stuff. So you never know what you find in those records. So I think I will end at this point. So part 2 of Live Oak will be next month. Any questions? I was afraid that was going to happen.
So other than like the minutes from the meetings and stuff, what other kind of sources do you have?
I've got some of the old Democrats or versions of the Democrat, even some of the predecessor ones. I've got a few miscellaneous copies of. Of Court records, lots of court records. I've got court records all the way back. Deeds, those kinds of things. Notices of incorporation, which show about businesses that actually incorporated, which is not all of them, you know, but some that incorporated. Marriage licenses, some death, probate type stuff. A lot of court records, but also the deeds, the minutes, not just the county, but the city. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot that we've lost over the years, don't get me wrong. But knock on wood, we have kept a lot of our stuff too. So we are blessed in one way or the other, that digital, microfilm, or paper copy to have a lot of stuff. So county courthouse is open. You can come look at our records, 8-4:30. Come have fun with them. A lot of good stuff. I mean, I'll help people, and sometimes they don't want help anymore after I show them what their ancestors and relatives did. It's like, I had no idea. I mean, I told people before, I mean, my family's been here since the Civil War. And in Madison County before that, some of them. So I'm 7th generation Suwannee County. You go in the records, those courthouse records, and you can find, divorces, lawsuits with my family. My 4 great-grandfather lost 160 acres because he didn't pay $3 in taxes back in the 1870s. I mean, I had some ancestors kill people. That one tried to kill somebody. They absconded from the county. They couldn't find them. Another one did kill somebody in the late 1800s. It was determined to be self-defense. Basically, the other guy made fun of his daughter's chest size. And it was self-defense. I mean, we all, if you've lived here long enough, your family's lived here long enough, we all have skeletons in our family's closet. But I mean, it's very interesting. Those houses of ill repute, those were more prominent than they should have been back then. Bigamy, that was another big thing. A lot of bigamists. They would like move from other places, move to Suwannee County, get married, and then their other spouse would find out about it and charge them with that. So I just, even Gus Potsdamer, I mentioned him, I'll mention him again.
It was all that stress from the Yankees moving in.
Yeah. That's how it was.
It was only
Some
the
were.
It was only the Yankees.
Yeah, it must have been just the Yankees doing it.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the sheriff at one point, he was running businesses without a liquor license, a liquor business without a license. He was charged with cohabitation. The president pardoned him. I don't know how he had those connections. It's crazy some of the stuff you see in those records. I love going through because every time I go through them, I find something new.
Stuff that they get in the minutes.
I will put what is said. Sometimes it may not be accurate, but if that's what they, so and so stated, I put it in there. It's still a summary. It's not a verbatim.
Yeah.
I mean, a 2-hour county commission meeting may have 15 pages of minutes, double spaced, but 10, 15 pages of minutes. Whereas back then, a whole day's worth, again, 2 paragraphs. But there's a lot more detail in my minutes. And part of the reason I do that is, number one, I have to research stuff for county commissioners and other folks. Number two, as a historian, I know how aggravating it is to look at those old minutes. It's like, okay, I find these two things y'all determined. What happened the other 7 hours? I mean, what led up to that? What else was discussed?
They took a break to go to the House of Ill Repute.
Possible. Thank y'all again. Lord willing, see you next month. Part 2 of Library.